She called it humiliation. The internet called it justice. Somewhere between those two words stood Karen Madison, 42, retail supervisor. Fluent in policy manuals and weaponized politeness, clutching a narrative she had rehearsed so many times it sounded like scripture. In her telling, she was the victim of a televised ambush, a public scolding that scorched her reputation and cost her the comfortable life she'd arranged like a window display. Neat, themed, and under control. In her telling, the problem wasn't what she had done, it was how it made her look. That distinction would become the hinge on which everything turned. Before the lawsuit, there had been a complaint. Before the complaint, a confrontation. And before the confrontation, a seed. Small. Ordinary. The kind that takes root in a person who believes rules exist to protect them and punish everyone else. Karen ran her store like a tiny nation-state. Refunds were foreign treaties. Discounts were border disputes. Employees were citizens until they made a mistake. Then they were insurgents. And customers? They were useful as long as they behaved. The first fracture in her control came with a return. $15 and a receipt smudged by rain. It wasn't the money. It never is. It was the principle, the sacred doctrine that says nothing slips past the sentinel at the counter. Under that doctrine, compassion is an enemy combatant. So when a teenage cashier, new to the job, still learning the choreography of apologies and barcodes, hesitated, Karen stepped in with the choreography she knew best. Words as knives wrapped in smiles. Questions delivered like verdicts. The performance was polished. The performative sigh. The precise tap of a manicured finger on the counter. The lecture about standards that implied anyone asking for help was undermining civilization. By the time her speech ended, the boy's hands shook. If anyone watching felt the urge to intervene, Karen had a phrase to swat them silent. Store policy. It was the 4-syllable shield she'd learned to raise against humanity. That day birthed 2 stories. One that lived in Karen's head, and one that lived in reality. In Karen's version, she defended order against chaos and was punished by a television judge who confused empathy with justice. In reality, something simpler happened. Arrogance met accountability, and the latter did not flinch. The judgment on national TV was not a spectacle to humiliate her. It was a mirror. But mirrors are cruel to people who have trained themselves to look away. After the episode aired, the comments found her. They always do. Her phone turned into a weather alert system for consequences, notifications arriving like thunder, then hail, then a sky gone green. Coworkers grew distant. A district manager asked for a conversation. The teenager's mother, whose name Karen never bothered to learn, filed a complaint that read less like a grievance and more like a wound. Inside Karen, something fragile began to calcify into a story about persecution. She didn't rethink. She doubled down. She told friends she'd been edited to look bad. She told herself the judge had mocked her work ethic. She told a lawyer she wanted to sue. The lawyer, hungry, confident, fluent in phrases like emotional distress, listened just long enough to sense the publicity. Karen mistook that attention for validation. In late-night drafts on her laptop, she wrote declarations about her professional standing, about the psychic harm of being corrected on television, about losing sleep because strangers online called her behavior by its name. What she never wrote, what she could not write, was an admission of what had started all this. A $15 choice, and the pleasure she took in making someone smaller so she could feel bigger. By the time the case was scheduled, she had begun to savor a fantasy, walking into a courtroom not as a defendant, but as a plaintiff seeking revenge draped in legitimacy. She pictured measured words, her own poised dignity, the restoration of a reputation she believed she'd only misplaced. She rehearsed lines in the mirror, smoothing her tone to a credible victim's cadence. Each practice session was another layer of lacquer over the same old wood, but entitlement has a tell. It flinches at questions. It bristles at context. It thinks motives are private property. And when entitlement meets a judge who has seen every variety of performance, its edges show. Karen didn't understand that yet. She believed in a version of law that worked like customer service. Escalate loud enough, and someone comped the bill. She believed in a version of truth that could be curated. She believed that if she could control the conversation, she could control the consequences. Still, there was a splinter in her certainty, a nagging memory, brief, easily dismissed, of a lens in the ceiling, red light winking during the argument, the way a coworker's eyes had traveled upward before meeting hers again. She filed that memory in a drawer labeled irrelevant. She would later call it a trap, but traps only work on people moving in the wrong direction. When she signed the last affidavit, she felt victorious. She told herself she had taken back the narrative. She told herself this would teach the judge a lesson about professional respect. She told herself that the internet would finally hear her side. And then, like all stories that have confused attention for proof, hers moved toward the one thing it could not survive: evidence. If you've ever believed that embarrassment is the injury and not the consequence, you might find sympathy in Karen's posture. But look closer. The bruise isn't shame inflicted from outside. It's truth pressing from within. Karen called it humiliation. The internet called it justice. The law would soon call it something else entirely. And long before any ruling was read, a quiet reckoning had already begun, the kind that doesn't need an audience to be real. If accountability matters to you, pause for a breath here and remember this. When you tell yourself the story that hurts least, reality keeps the receipts. The morning of the hearing felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a performance Karen had been waiting her whole life to deliver. She arrived 15 minutes early, as if punctuality could disguise insecurity, wearing a beige suit that seemed chosen to whisper professionalism while screaming control. Her lawyer walked beside her, carrying a briefcase she insisted on calling a strategy portfolio. Inside were printouts of online comments, screenshots of memes, and one carefully highlighted transcript of the episode she called Exhibit A, Madison versus Common Sense. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors, and Karen stepped inside like a celebrity walking onto a soundstage. The air carried that peculiar silence reserved for anticipation, the audience's quiet expectation that something they weren't supposed to see was about to happen. Camera crews adjusted their angles, technicians whispered into headsets, and somewhere beyond the lights, Judge Judy reviewed her notes with the serene focus of someone who already knew how this story ended. Karen mistook that calm for hesitation. That would be her first mistake. When the case was called, Judy didn't look up immediately. She finished reading the file, closed it with deliberate precision, and only then raised her eyes. The pause was surgical. It told the room that control was not shared here. It was singular. "Ms. Madison," she began, her tone steady, clipped, unimpressed. "You're suing this court for emotional distress and reputational harm stemming from your previous televised appearance. Is that correct?" Karen nodded, her lips parting to deliver a prepared speech about dignity and justice. "That is correct, Your Honor," she began, "and I would appreciate being treated with the same level of respect I afford others." The phrasing was perfect in her mind, authoritative, righteous, bulletproof. But Judy's slight raise of an eyebrow was a weather report. "A storm was coming," Karen continued, voice steady but rising with the confidence of self-belief mistaken for strength. "On national television, you humiliated me, mocked my profession, and allowed an audience to laugh at my pain. That's defamation. My career has suffered irreparable damage because of your actions." The gallery murmured, a soft ripple that made the bailiff's head turn. Judy waited until the sound settled, then asked the kind of question that sounds harmless but draws blood. "Ms. Madison, did I instruct you to behave inappropriately during your employment? Did I ask you to insult your staff on live television?" Karen's expression faltered, momentarily unprogrammed. "That's not the point," she said quickly. "The point is that you broadcast it in a misleading way." Judy nodded once as if noting a specimen under glass. "So, your complaint isn't that you were misrepresented, but that you were represented accurately in public?" The sentence hit like a sudden temperature drop. The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer tried to interject, but Judy's gaze silenced him before the word objection could fully form. "Ms. Madison," Judy continued, "I've presided over 25,000 cases. You're the first plaintiff who has ever sued me for doing my job correctly." A faint chuckle from the audience, instantly quelled by Judy's glance, punctuated the absurdity of the moment. Karen leaned forward, desperate to recover control. "You think this is funny? You think ruining someone's livelihood is entertainment?" Her tone was sharper now, words trembling on the edge of outrage. "I lost friends, I lost my job, You lost your temper," Judy interrupted, voice low but cutting. "And the world saw it. That's not defamation. That's documentation." The phrase lingered in the air, echoing off wood and marble like a verdict already sealed. Karen's hands tightened around her folder. The attorney whispered something she ignored. She had come expecting a duel and found herself facing an autopsy of her own behavior, her own logic, her own myth. Every argument she rehearsed at home dissolved in the courtroom's fluorescent truth. The more she spoke, the smaller her words became. Judy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority, when it's real, doesn't shout. By the end of the morning, Karen's posture had wilted into defensiveness. The press note scribblers in the back row were already framing the story in their minds. Woman sues Judge Judy, instantly regrets it. But Karen, stubborn to the last, clung to her fantasy that the evidence favored her. "I have proof," she said, tapping the folder. "Video proof that shows how this all started." Judy's eyes flickered with quiet amusement. "Proof can be useful," she said evenly, "especially when it plays all the way through." That was the moment the courtroom's atmosphere changed, the invisible tremor before an earthquake. Karen didn't know it yet, but the proof she was so eager to invoke was about to play back in a way she never imagined. And in a courtroom that ran on truth, not sympathy, footage would soon become fate. If you've ever built a case on the belief that perception outweighs reality, take note here. Reality may wait patiently, but when it arrives with receipts. Karen Madison had built her identity on control. Every rule she enforced, every complaint she filed, every apology she refused, each one was a brick in the wall she called professionalism. But now, in Judge Judy's courtroom, that same wall had begun to crack. The cameras captured everything: her fixed smile, her twitching hands, the subtle tremor in her voice when Judy's questions sliced too close to the bone. What she mistook for composure was, in truth, collapse rehearsing itself. The cross-examination began quietly. Judy's tone was conversational, almost kind, the way a surgeon might speak before making the first incision. "Ms. Madison," she said, "you claim emotional distress. Let's talk about what caused it." Karen nodded, feigning confidence. "The ridicule, Your Honor, the laughter. I was portrayed as unstable. The show edited it to make me look angry." "Edited," Judy repeated softly, as though tasting the word. "Tell me, did you throw the receipt at your employee?" Karen hesitated. "I dropped it. It may have looked—" "Did you raise your voice?" Judy interrupted. I spoke firmly. "It was a misunderstanding. Did you call your staff incompetent children who should work somewhere with less responsibilities on camera?" Judy's tone never lifted above civility, but every syllable carried the weight of documentation. Karen's lawyer shifted uneasily. "That statement," Karen began, "was taken out of context." Judy nodded slowly, her eyes unblinking. "That's the wonderful thing about context, Ms. Madison. It tends to arrive in full when we let the evidence play." The audience stirred, sensing a shift. For the first time, Karen's certainty began to wobble. Judge Judy gestured toward the clerk. "Let's revisit the original incident. I'd like to confirm whether Ms. Madison's distress came from humiliation or from exposure." Karen's lawyer whispered urgently, "We didn't approve the video submission." Judy didn't respond. The clerk placed a small black USB drive on the desk like a detonator. Karen's heart hammered. "That's not admissible," she blurted. "That's private footage." Judy tilted her head. "Private? It happened on your store's premises, during business hours under your own security system. You brought up video evidence, Ms. Madison. Consider this. The rest of it." The lights dimmed slightly as the monitor flickered to life. Karen sat frozen, eyes darting between the screen and the judge. The video began with the calm hum of a normal workday, the register beeping, the door chime jingling, and then her own voice, sharp and venomous, cut through. "You think you can talk back to me? You're lucky I don't have you escorted out right now." The courtroom went silent except for the audio. In the footage, the teenage cashier stammered an apology, hands trembling. Karen snatched the receipt from his hand and jabbed the air with it like a weapon. "You're a liability to this company. Do you even know what professionalism means?" The video caught her smirk as the boy's eyes welled up. The sound of other customers gasping filled the recording. Back in the courtroom, Karen's face drained of color. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "That wasn't supposed to be public," Judy leaned forward. "You made it public the moment you sued. You asked this court to assess your reputation. I'm simply showing it the way you presented it, to the world." Karen tried to speak but found no words. Her lawyer sat motionless, knowing any objection would be drowned by the footage still rolling. Her pacing behind the counter, her laugh, her final words on the tape. "Let them record me. I have nothing to hide, The monitor went black. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that rewrites everything inside it. Judy folded her hands. You said the show embarrassed you, Ms. Madison, but embarrassment isn't cruelty. Its honesty reflected back. Sometimes the truth doesn't humiliate us. It just shows what was already there. The audience murmured again, not in laughter this time, but in something closer to awe. Karen sat rigid, as if any movement might trigger another replay. She could feel the shape of her downfall forming in real time, carved not by editing or bias but by her own voice, her own choices. Ego had become evidence, and evidence never apologizes. Judy finally spoke, her tone quiet but final. We'll take a short recess, she said. When we return, we'll discuss damages, if any remain to be discussed. The gavel struck once, and the sound echoed like the closing of a door. Karen's reflection lingered faintly on the black screen before her, the only mirror she could not look away from. Pride always believes it can out-talk proof, but proof doesn't argue. It just plays. When the court reconvened after recess, the atmosphere had shifted. The oxygen felt heavier, the lights seemed brighter, and every camera operator in the room knew they were witnessing a reckoning unfold frame by frame. Karen returned to her seat a different person, still defiant on the outside, but beneath the powder and posture, her composure had curdled into panic. Her lawyer's whispered reassurances couldn't mask the tremor in her hands. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't managing the room. She was surviving it. Judge Judy re-entered with the calm of someone who already knew the outcome but intended to let truth do its full work. She sat, adjusted her glasses, and folded her hands. Ms. Madison, she began, before we resume, I want to be absolutely clear about something. When you filed this suit, you accused this court of causing you harm. My job today is to determine whether that harm existed, or whether it was self-inflicted. Karen's mouth opened, but Judy's raised finger silenced her before a syllable could escape. I've listened to your testimony. I've watched the footage, but there's something you may not realize. The evidence you just saw wasn't the only footage obtained. A ripple moved through the gallery. Camera zoomed in. Karen blinked rapidly, her face tightening. What do you mean? She asked, her voice pitched between disbelief and dread. Judy nodded to the bailiff. Bring in Exhibit D. A second USB drive appeared, this one marked with the store's logo and a timestamp. The bailiff inserted it into the monitor. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen filled with an image from a different day entirely. The same store, the same counter. But this time, Karen wasn't yelling. She was bragging. The courtroom watched as she leaned across the counter, confiding in another employee. You know that episode I was on? She said, laughing. The one with the judge? The internet's obsessed with me. I should sue her just to keep the attention going. She laughed again, loud and sharp. Publicity's still publicity. People remember the villain more than the victim. Gasps rippled through the room. The bailiff turned instinctively toward Judy, whose expression hadn't changed. Ms. Madison, she said softly, was that edited too? Karen's lawyer rose. Objection, context. Sustained, Judy said, but her tone carried the finality of a verdict. The context is precisely what's on trial. Let's continue. The video resumed, showing Karen days later rehearsing her interview with a local news reporter. She thought she could embarrass me on her show, she said, practicing into the mirror. But I'll make her pay for it. I've got people who will side with me. No one likes a woman in power tearing down another woman. The hypocrisy rang out louder than any gavel. Karen's voice on the recording sounded proud, unashamed, deliberate. This wasn't a woman broken by humiliation. It was a strategist plotting revenge and calling it justice. When the screen went dark, Judy leaned back. So, Ms. Madison, she said, would you like to amend your claim? Or shall we proceed with the version where you filed this lawsuit not because of trauma, but because attention began to fade? Karen's lips quivered. That's not how I meant it, she muttered. I was angry. I was joking. Anger isn't a defense, Judy replied. And jokes stop being jokes when they cost people time, money, and integrity. She turned to the clerk. Please log this as Exhibit D. The record should reflect the plaintiff's statement of motive, unedited, uninterrupted, and undeniable. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the sound of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Karen slumped slightly, her earlier arrogance dissolving into a visible ache. For years she had believed that control came from volume, that whoever spoke loudest won. But now, the loudest voice in the room was her own. echoing back through evidence she couldn't silence. Judy glanced at the audience before delivering the line that would later flood social media feeds. When you chase attention, you eventually catch accountability. The gavel tapped once, lightly, almost mercifully. We'll resume closing statements. But I suggest, Ms. Madison, that you consider which part of this story you truly want history to remember. Karen sat motionless as people filed out, her reflection once again caught in the black monitor in front of her. For the second time that day, she saw herself unfiltered, and realized that every performance eventually meets its encore. The trap was never the footage or the judge's questions. The trap was the lie she told herself, that the story would end when she said it did. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived without a single drumbeat of warning. Judge Judy leaned forward, her tone calm but deliberate. "Bailiff," she said, "please cue Exhibit E." Those words rippled through the courtroom like static through an old radio. Karen shifted in her seat, her breathing shallow. Every muscle in her face fought to hold its shape. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering something frantic and useless. There's no strategy left when the evidence starts to breathe. The monitor came to life, filling the courtroom with the grainy glow of surveillance footage. A timestamp blinked in the corner. The store again. Same counter, same world of receipts, same fluorescent lights humming with indifference. The camera's perspective was cold, mechanical, without bias, without emotion. It saw everything. And now, everyone else would too. Karen appeared on screen mid-conversation with a middle-aged customer. The sound came through next, a clear audio feed from the store's internal system. The woman in the footage was polite, explaining that her purchase had been double-charged. Karen's voice, sharp and brittle, sliced through the air. "That's not possible," she snapped. "You people always say that. Maybe you don't know how credit cards work." The courtroom shifted in their seats. Even without seeing her face, the arrogance in her tone was unmistakable. Judy said nothing. She let the silence fill with revelation. The footage continued. The customer calmly produced a receipt and pointed at the duplicate charge. Karen rolled her eyes. "You think I'm stupid?" she said. "You can't just make up stories and expect to get free money." Then she motioned for the teenage employee to come over. "Show her what real customer service looks like." Her sarcasm drew nervous laughter from another employee off-screen. The customer's shoulders stiffened. "Ma'am," she said softly, "you don't have to be rude." That line, the quiet dignity of it, hung in the air. Karen laughed again. "Oh, I'm rude. I'm the one working. You're the one wasting my time." And then she turned away, dismissing the customer mid-sentence. Back in the courtroom, Karen's lips trembled. The playback continued mercilessly. The video jumped forward a few minutes. A security guard entered the frame, summoned by Karen's gesture. "Escort her out," she ordered. "She's disturbing my staff." The guard hesitated. "She didn't do anything wrong, ma'am." Karen's reply landed like a verdict. "Do it anyway." The woman in the footage left the store quietly, her composure intact. Karen, believing the moment had ended, turned to her co-worker and muttered, "That's how you handle idiots." Gasps rippled through the audience. The footage had no music, no edits, no narration, only truth in real time. Karen pressed her palms against her knees, staring at the floor. She'd wanted a public reckoning. She was getting one. Judge Judy waited until the video ended, then spoke softly. "Ms. Madison, do you recall this incident?" Karen swallowed hard. "It looks exaggerated." Judy raised an eyebrow. Exaggerated? Cameras tend to exaggerate reality by showing it exactly as it happened. Karen's lawyer tried one last objection. "Your Honor, the footage lacks full context." Judy's tone didn't shift. "The context," she said, "is a pattern. This isn't one bad day. This is behavior on repeat. You claim to be humiliated on my show, but humiliation requires innocence. What we're seeing is arrogance, unmasked by time and technology." The words landed with the finality of a closing gavel. Karen's eyes filled, but not with remorse, only disbelief that the world had turned so quickly against her. "You don't understand," she whispered almost to herself. "I was under pressure. They provoked me." Judy's gaze softened, but only slightly. "We all face pressure, Ms. Madison. Most people meet it with grace. You met it with cruelty. That's not pressure, it's a choice." The courtroom sat silent again. Even the usual shuffling of papers had stopped. Cameras zoomed in on Karen's face, the very image that would later headline every viral clip. Mascara streaking faintly, pride collapsing, truth landing without apology. Judy looked to the clerk. "Please attach Exhibit E to the official record," she said. "It's important that history doesn't lose this moment." Then she turned back to Karen. "Do you still believe this lawsuit is about embarrassment?" Karen hesitated. "It's about respect," Judy nodded slowly. "Then consider this. Respect isn't a right, it's a reflection. What we give, we get. The camera doesn't lie, Ms. Madison. It simply holds up the mirror." The gavel struck once. The footage froze on the final frame. Karen's smirk caught mid-sentence, the kind of expression that once meant control, but now meant exposure. The courtroom's silence stretched long after the echo faded. When truth has proof, arrogance becomes history, and when the mirror plays back, there's no pause button for regret. When the final frame of the CCTV froze on screen, the entire courtroom felt suspended in the breath between judgment and consequence. Judge Judy sat still for a long moment, the silence almost ceremonial. Karen stared at the monitor as if refusing to recognize herself in it, as if denial could rewrite evidence. But truth doesn't wait for permission. It stands uninvited and fills every corner. Finally, Judy broke the silence. "Ms. Madison," she said, "you've brought a case built on perception, not on fact. You accuse this court of defaming you, yet what the footage shows is not defamation, it's documentation." The words echoed, the same line she had used earlier, but now it landed with absolute weight. "Defamation requires falsehood. You gave us the truth, filmed in high definition." Karen swallowed hard. "That video doesn't show who I really am." Her voice trembled. "I was angry. You were yourself," Judy interrupted gently. "And that's precisely why it hurts," the gallery murmured. Reporters leaned forward, sensing history. Karen's lawyer shuffled papers, searching for something to cling to. But every note, every exhibit, every planned rebuttal had turned to dust under the light of unfiltered truth. Judy continued, her tone steady as law itself. "This court finds no merit in your claim. The humiliation you feel was not inflicted by me or by this program. It was born from your own conduct and magnified by your refusal to take responsibility. You did not lose your reputation here today. You revealed it." Karen shook her head, voice breaking. "You can't talk to me like this. I have rights." Judy leaned forward slightly, eyes unwavering. "And you've exercised them, Ms. Madison, loudly, publicly, and without restraint. But rights are not shields from consequences. You can sue anyone you wish, but you cannot sue for the truth." The audience gasped softly, a collective exhale of awe and agreement. Judy wasn't angry. She didn't need to be. Her calm was the kind of justice that doesn't shout. It simply arrives. Karen's lawyer made one final attempt. "Your Honor, my client has suffered significant emotional distress from the online reaction to her prior appearance." "Surely there must be recourse." Judy turned her gaze on him. "The internet does not punish innocence, counselor. It amplifies reality. Perhaps your client should consider that what went viral was not the editing, but the entitlement." Then she faced Karen once more. "Here is the verdict. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. No damages awarded. The court further finds that the plaintiff's conduct constitutes an abuse of judicial resources. Costs will be paid by Ms. Madison in full." The gavel struck once, a single crisp sound that carried more force than shouting ever could. The courtroom erupted into quiet murmurs. Cameras captured every flicker of emotion. Karen didn't move. Her lawyer touched her arm, but she stayed frozen, staring ahead at nothing. For a moment, Judge Judy softened. "Ms. Madison," she said, her voice lower now, almost reflective, "there's something I've learned after all these years behind this bench. People often mistake embarrassment for injustice. They think feeling exposed means they were wronged, but embarrassment is the soul's way of asking us to grow. It's an invitation, not a punishment." Karen blinked through tears. "So what do I do now?" she whispered. Judy tilted her head slightly. "Start with an apology, to yourself first, then to those who earned it." That line would later become the headline of every article, the closing quote in every viral post. "Start with an apology, to yourself first." It spread faster than the footage, stitched across edits, reaction videos, and think pieces about accountability in the digital age. Within hours, the clip dominated social media. The hashtag #ApologizeFirst trended worldwide. Comment sections flooded with viewers confessing their own moments of arrogance, their own echoes of Karen's reflection. Karen left the courtroom quietly, her once crisp steps faltering as the crowd parted. The same cameras that had once felt like her audience now followed her exit like a shadow. She didn't look back. Judge Judy gathered her files, closed the folder with practiced calm, and said softly, mostly to herself, "Case dismissed." The audience stood in a silent respect that wasn't for spectacle. It was for closure. Some verdicts don't end in punishment. They end in revelation, and sometimes the harshest sentence is simply watching yourself, unfiltered, undeniable and true. Outside the courthouse, the day had turned overcast, the kind of gray that feels poetic only to those not living through it. Reporters gathered like storm clouds, microphones flashing, lenses hunting for the fallen face of a woman who had once believed the world revolved around her composure. Karen Madison didn't speak. Her lawyer tried to usher her through the sea of questions, but silence was her only refuge now. Every sentence she might have said risked becoming tomorrow's headline. And after what had just unfolded inside, she finally understood that words could be weapons, but silence could be surrendered. Within hours, clips from the hearing flooded the internet. The moment Judy said "you can't sue the truth" became a global refrain. The footage of Karen's reaction, wide-eyed, trembling, caught between shock and shame, circulated across every platform. Reaction videos appeared in dozens of languages. Comment sections became confessional booths. People admitting the times they too had confused pride for strength, defiance for dignity. The hashtag #SureApologize first crossed continents, but viral fame is a strange kind of justice. It doesn't destroy, it exposes. Karen's inbox is filled with messages, some cruel, others compassionate. Former coworkers wrote things like, "I wish it hadn't taken this for you to see it." Her former district manager sent a single line, "Grace always costs less than ego." Each message felt like another piece of her old armor falling away. At home, the house felt smaller than it used to. The certificates framed on the walls, Employee of the Month, Regional Sales Recognition, Leadership Seminar Award, looked less like accomplishments and more like disguises. For the first time in years, she didn't turn on the TV. She sat on the couch with her phone face down, the silence pressing in. Somewhere across the city, Judge Judy's episode aired again, this time with a new ending, her closing statement broadcast to millions. Embarrassment isn't cruelty. It's the truth in the mirror. The audience in the episode applauded. Karen, alone in her living room, didn't. A week later, she visited the store she once managed. The staff changed, the decor updated, but the faint smell of paper receipts and coffee lingered like memory. The young cashier, the same boy she'd once humiliated, was there, now promoted to assistant manager. He saw her walk in, froze, then nodded politely. Karen approached the counter slowly, voice soft. "You probably don't want to see me," she said. He shrugged, cautious but kind. "Depends which version of you I'm seeing today," she smiled weakly. "The one that finally knows what sorry means." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small check. "I can't change what I said," she murmured, "but I can try to match the damage I caused." He hesitated, then nodded. "It's not about the money," he said. "It's just nice to see someone mean it." For a fleeting second, something unclenched inside her, a tiny exhale of release. She walked out without looking back, the bell above the door chiming like the punctuation at the end of a long, necessary sentence. Over the next month, the noise faded. The algorithms moved on as they always do, but what stayed was the echo of a single line, the one that had broken through pride and reached the world's weary conscience. "Start with an apology. To yourself first." People printed it on posters, quoted it in sermons, turned it into something larger than the trial that birthed it. It became not just Judy's wisdom but a collective vow. Karen's life didn't collapse. It transformed. She took a job far from retail, in a community center where her role was to mediate customer complaints. Irony turned into atonement. Sometimes people recognized her and whispered, but instead of shrinking, she nodded. "That was me," she'd say. "And that's why I listen now." Months later, a local news station aired a follow-up story titled, "From Lawsuit to Lesson, The Woman Who Sued Judge Judy Learns What Justice Really Means." It ended with a brief interview outside the same courthouse. Karen looked older, calmer, unmasked. "I used to think humiliation was the worst thing that could happen to me," she said. "But it was actually the best. It stripped away everything that wasn't real." The camera caught the faintest smile before cutting to black. In the end, the verdict wasn't what broke her. It was what built her. Because sometimes the courtroom isn't where punishment lives. It's where truth finally meets mercy, and where the echo of accountability becomes the beginning of peace. If you believe that accountability is strength and not shame, share this story. Comment apologize first to remind the world that redemption starts where excuses end.